a regulatory regime that is favorable to crypto. I think this is a necessity for it to work long term. I think it will work long term. I don't know if it'll take a year or 5 years or 50 years. Again, I don't really care. I think it's inevitable. Like Bitcoin and crypto will outlast the United States of America.
You're listening to the Unstoppable Podcast, the go-to place for everyone to learn about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web. Welcome to the metaverse.
GM, welcome to the Unstoppable Podcast. My name is Josh Gordon. I'm your host, and today we've got a great guest. He's been a builder in the Web2 world from a social media perspective, also has lots of experience with the creator economy, and now is experimenting with dApps, NFTs, and building in Web3. Sahil Lavingia, thank you so much for joining the Unstoppable Pod today. I'm excited to talk to you about all things crypto. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I look forward to these podcasts every week, and I've had this one especially highlighted on my list. I just think the way that you speak on Twitter is so like articulate and concise, and being able to bring some of that like brain power and also just your extensive experience to this conversation has been something I've been looking forward to. And I think it actually might have been this morning as I was doing just my general Twitter research and reading. I think you had a tweet that said, anyone can teach by learning in public. And that resonated with me because I feel like this podcast its goal is to be educational about Web3 and crypto. And, I am going through my learning experience in public during these interviews. So like that really hit the nail on the head and exactly what I'm hoping to get out of this interview with you.
Awesome. Well,
let's just jump right on in. I want to ask you just like straight up, is Web3 the next big thing in tech?
Seems like it. I mean, the is a strong word. Anytime I see the word the, I always try to replace it with an A. I sort of think that keeps me humble about sort of my own sort of hard set opinions. And so I think it's a big thing, one of the next big things in tech. I think there are so many things to look forward to in the future. Decentralization, privacy, Web3, all of that stuff for sure, but also self-driving cars, AI. There's just so much to get excited about. All the stuff happening around supply chain, what Tesla's been up to, what SpaceX is up to. I mean, I think the sort of, we're at the beginning of infinity, and I think 100 years from now we're going to look back and the world will be pretty unrecognizable, in large part due to crypto, because I think this sort of reinvention of the capital markets is a necessary component of all the other technology, right? Like the startup industry only works because of equity financing, which did not exist in 1776. It was kind of invented in New York. And so I think there's crypto in a sense will kind of undergird a lot of the other changes, and it's sort of a necessary but not sufficient kind of prerequisite, I think.
Yeah, no, totally. And I've been spending some time thinking about that too. Like I worked in VR and AI before kind of my current role right now around crypto and NFTs, and seeing kind of the other side of what some of these tech movements look like. There is a lot to be done. There is a lot to be excited about, but at least in my bubble, it appears to be that there isn't as much excitement around it online as there is around like these NFTs and some of the crypto projects we're seeing. Like VR and self-driving is important, but are you seeing the same level of energy around it online?
I'm certainly not online. I mean, I think ultimately, people are pretty simple creatures. There's sort of two kinds of games that we play: status game and wealth games. And I think crypto especially kind of NFTs, is kind of like the sort of 1 + 1 = 500 there. And so I think you just see this level of online engagement and sort of all of these social and sort of financial incentives point to this massive kind of sort of overdrive in terms of sort of the consumption. But in general, I would say, ultimately the bottleneck for innovation is not how many people are tweeting about something, right? The bottleneck is, people like Hayden Adams and Vitalik Buterin and Elon Musk. Like those are, and all of the people who build alongside those folks. And I would say that crypto has plenty of them, but so does Web 2, so does Web 1, so does AI, so does robotics. Robotics will be absolutely massive. Biotech, I think, will be absolutely massive in the next 100 years. Um, Unfortunately, I've thought about, tweeting about synthetic wombs is certainly one way to get people excited about some of these other issues. Uh, but ultimately, the thing that I think a lot of these other industries can learn from crypto is how do you galvanize people? How do you get people excited about the technology that you're building, even though it may be several years out? I think one of those ways is to incentivize people to give them effectively equity in what you're doing early, and then they can participate in the upside. So I think there's certainly like reasons, for that, and I think certain industries, could. I always point to the example of Elon Musk, because he only started using Twitter in, I think, something like 2015, 2016, which is a lot later than you would think, given how good he is at it and how important Twitter is for Tesla. Tesla basically faced bankruptcy, probably would have gone out of business in 2017, 2018 without his very public Twitter persona, right? And so imagine that 2 years before that, he didn't even have a Twitter account. And this is, by the way, like everyone in tech had a Twitter account. He was kind of like the laggard in this way. Um, and so, I just think it sort of goes to show the importance of someone embracing social media. And like, I think that's sort of like the macro trend that everyone should really be paying attention to, which is every individual can build an audience, and talk directly to kind of all the stakeholders. And that can be incredibly powerful. I mean, you're seeing this in the war in Ukraine with what the president of Ukraine has been up to, right? Like this is kind of like a whole new war, kind of war, sort of a social media economic war. And its power, right? Its influence, its power, it's sort of soft power, but it can be incredibly effective in getting sort of whatever you want to get done.
Totally. Totally, yeah, and the thing about Elon is interesting too is like Tesla doesn't really even have. I mean, we don't see Tesla ads because if they want to get the message out, it comes straight from the most followed person on Twitter. So there is so much power in having that platform, and then the communities we're seeing on Twitter around some of these NFT projects, we've incentivized the masses, we've incentivized thousands of people to talk about the projects they're invested in or they have money in. And so instead of just having the president of your VR company talk about the latest feature update or something, now you have 10,000 people on the ground who want to talk about their NFT, why it's cool, why it has value. So a lot to be learned there around the power of an audience. And I wanted to start this pod off just asking you that question straight off the bat because I thought you'd have an interesting answer, but I would like to start off how I normally do with our guests. Can you walk me through how you got interested in crypto originally and where you're at in your crypto journey today, and just kind of a summary so we can give all the listeners an understanding of where you're coming at from this? Because I also believe you were informed about crypto and potentially a player in it very early on through your connections in Silicon Valley and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly when I remember reading about Bitcoin initially, but it was probably it was the latest, like the sort of my documentation and sort of in writing the latest was April of 2011, roughly, is when I sort of was I have words out there about Bitcoin and crypto and things like that. And that was because I had sort of built Gumroad. I had built this sort of side project. I'm still working on it today, so it kind of succeeded. But at the time, it was just kind of a weekend project. My goal was kind of this thesis in which everyone was going to build an audience online, and therefore, like musicians, designers, writers, filmmakers, photographers, like everybody is going to kind of sell directly. That was sort of the next obvious sort of step for me, and so I built this tool that allowed for that. It basically allowed for you to kind of like upload some digital content, get a link, share that link on Twitter. Someone can buy, get their download, and super simple, super fast. And Bitcoin sort of felt very kind of cleanly into that. I remember having a conversation with Naval, from Twitter, and in 2011, around that time, talking about Gumroad and talking about like the atomic storefront, right? Like, why do storefronts need to exist? Well, they need to exist because like you need real estate, right? And like you can't have like one store per item. Like that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but on the internet you totally could, right? For a bunch of reasons that didn't play out exactly the way that maybe we thought it would have. But certainly like Bitcoin and crypto was kind of in the conversation around sort of a money that was was not controlled by a certain sort of central authority. Was a pretty important kind of component of that. And so yeah, sort of pretty early. I don't think I bought any Bitcoin probably until maybe like 2013 or something like that, where I felt I was super late. Like I remember going to dinners and everyone was talking about Bitcoin being $100, up from 12 or something a month before, and I was like, wow, it's too late. But I did buy some around then, and got some Stellar back when they launched. And so I've done all right. I didn't participate in Ethereum, really, at any part of their token sale. Like I don't know. I think at that point I had kind of left San Francisco. I'd kind of my sort of journey had been to kind of build Gumroad, turn into a company, raised a bunch of money, and then failed basically, and then left San Francisco in the Bay Area, and like basically spent like 2 or 3 years like drawing and writing full time. And so I didn't pay ton of attention to tech, missed Ethereum, um, but then yeah, kind of participated in whatever happened in 2017. And then now I take a sort of a pretty dumb approach to it, which is I just dollar cost average into a bunch of stuff, and we'll continue doing that sort of indefinitely. Unfortunately, the way like my sort of situation is set up is that like there's no way I can ever really index too much on crypto. It's effectively impossible for me to do that, because the vast majority of my net worth is going to be in the company that I founded, which is fiat, U.S. dollar denominated. So even if I put every single liquid dollar into crypto, which is effectively what I do, I basically put all my liquidity into crypto. It's still not enough to really make sense, until I get like true liquidity on my founder shares. So who knows when that will happen?
And I didn't necessarily plan on asking you this, but since we're talking about the investing in crypto, like right now, and how you like DCA, I follow the same approach because I'm not a trader by any means. But how, from a mental perspective, like prices are down right now, you see sentiment online, like the sentiment changes like that. How do you step back from like the day-to-day price action, and even knowing we have impending economic downturns because of all the things going on in the world, and inflation reaching potentially like a peak. Do you consider those things, or do you take this large macro view and still say this is what I believe in long term, so I'm still going to like dollar cost average along the way regardless of what's going on day to day?
I mean, to be honest, I have no idea what the market sentiment is. Like, I have no idea what the price of Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything is right now. Like, if you told me it's like 60,000 or 40,000, I'd have like no idea, on Bitcoin, right? Like, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my answer. Is like I literally have zero clue. Uh, I don't, I either dollar cost average into stuff, or I see a cool project by somebody I follow, Proof, for example, from Kevin Rose or something like that. Um, and then I buy and I will never sell. Like basically I will never sell. And
Awesome.
that's it. That's my strategy. I buy and hold forever. And I effectively never intend to make any money on my crypto because I never intend to sell any of it. Um, but in terms of like a net worth, I think it'll look really nice. But effectively, what happens, if you play the game right, you never actually have to sell, right? Because you can always use your equity as collateral, right? This is what people, Elon doesn't need to sell Tesla stock necessarily, right? He can kind of take a loan on his public equities. Um, and so I think if you play the game right, you should never really need to sell. And it's always interesting, like when I go into discords and people are talking about like things going up and down. Like I have a project, Fweb3, and you can't talk about price in that discord. You'll get banned immediately. There's zero. I don't care, about the token ourselves, or Bitcoin or Ethereum. Like I really just don't care. I mean, I sort of think about it like we're in the first 0.0000001% of the internet, and so like it's actually, you don't need to care about price, because it's like buying land in America. It's like buy as much land as you can, continue to do it, and you will die insanely wealthy, like incomprehensibly wealthy. Like we will all die living better lives than the richest people alive on Earth today, right? Like it won't even be close. And so if that's the case, then like why bother with like the price action on a daily, a weekly, a monthly basis? But yeah, I truly don't know. Like I don't log into my Coinbase unless I want to move some money around. I don't, I'm
Yeah.
just like I just don't really
So
know.
no, I appreciate the honesty there, and it definitely comes from a perspective where you I think you've had success in your life, right, where maybe the day-to-day movements aren't affecting your day-to-day finances. Some people maybe it is, so they're tracking closely, but still that philosophy of, I think that this is going to be something that appreciates or has value long term, so you're comfortable not looking day to day. So could you share with me, like, what is your thesis on crypto as a financial asset, and like what trend do you think is only going to help like crypto more broadly gain steam in the coming years? Because it sounds like you really see it as a long time horizon.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think there are a couple things that really need to happen, but not too many things. I think less than maybe people think. I mean, one is infrastructure, right? Like, one is effectively make things faster and cheaper. Like, that's a pretty simple one. Not easy, but sort of, I think if you can take Ethereum and via rollups or side chains or other L2, other L1s, or ZK stuff. And you can just effectively say like we can 1000x the scale of this thing. I think it'll kind of be like traffic in LA, where it'll effectively never be enough. You will, the sort of easier and cheaper and faster you make it, the sort of demand will always kind of increase like more than linearly to that, and so you'll never really be able to meet demand. And so I think that's like the number one thing that like crypto could do, is just to make it faster and cheaper. Obviously, there's the trilemma, et cetera, but that's sort of, I think, the big thing, and I'm sure that's the vast majority of the people I talk to are focused on that problem. um, and then the other thing is basically a regulatory regime that is favorable to crypto. I think this is a necessity for it to work long term. I think it will work long term. I don't know if it'll take a year or 5 years or 50 years. Again, I don't really care. I think it's inevitable. Like Bitcoin and crypto will outlast the United States of America. Um, and so I'm in no real rush. I think that's the other thing, is like I'm very content with my life right now. I do see, like for example, Gumroad, like in the up market might have been worth $250 million. And then Gumroad in a down market like it is now is probably worth like $100 million. So that's sort of, that's like $150 million difference, of which I own the majority of the company. So it's not like I'm not, I don't see that happening. I just think it doesn't matter, because long term, I'm sort of thinking in a much longer time horizon. And I'm not selling, I'm not buying, right? So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect my decision making. But I think if those two things happen, if there's sort of a way to scale Bitcoin and crypto in which, so basically that every single human being can participate in it, and it's effectively free for anyone to do so, I think those two things will be true in 100 years. And sort of there's a regulatory environment that allows for that to happen, and people can use crypto to kind of, for example, like use smart contracts to do things like mortgages and startup equity and loans and DeFi, effectively, like all fi can be DeFi'd. Then yeah, I think there's sort of effectively what you'll see is sort of $100 trillion market cap. What are we at now? Like 2 trillion or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think you'll see roughly like a 50x in the next 50 years, which most people would consider like a very, very good return, risk adjusted. But most people are, frankly, like, the number one problem people have, in my opinion, is they're just super impatient. Most people don't want a 50x in 50 years. They want a 50x in 5 days. Um, like
Yeah.
I can guarantee 50x in 50 years all day long. I can guarantee you a 10x in 10 years. Like, it's not that hard. By the way, if you do the math on what a 10x in 10 years looks like, it can be very aggressive if you're able to compound that. This is effectively what Warren Buffett did. Like his returns on an IRR basis are not that impressive compared to crypto. What's impressive is he's done that for 60 to 70 years, right? So if you can take a long view, you can actually really change like the profile and say, oh wow, like my portfolio is up 30%. That's an incredible number. Like I hope people listening realize like how insane a 30% return year over year is.
Yeah.
And when you see 1,000%, then you have to understand that is not sustainable. That is like definitionally not sustainable. You're taking advantage of somebody or something or some inefficiency in the market that most people just frankly cannot take advantage of. They're legally.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think even, I even needed to hear that. Like it's something I've been thinking about recently, is how people in the millennial generation, we grew up realizing the 2008 crisis was going on. House prices to a lot of my friends, honestly, are in what I would say is like an unreachable territory, just given current savings rate right now. And so people are looking for that thing that is going to boost their portfolio, boost their returns. And I've seen like myself and even some friends like migrate towards crypto just because of the return percentage, when you hear about what you could get versus the stock market. But even if you do have 15, 20, 30% realizing like over the long time horizon, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, if
So
you take a
totally,
thousand
totally good
bucks, right?
advice.
If you take $1,000, let's say you graduate college at, let's say 22 with $1,000, and you think you can grow that at 30% a year, and let's say you do that for 40 years, so like sort of by the time you're 68 or 62, right? You've kind of done that. That $1,000 is $36 million.
Mm,
Right. And that's I mean that's just the math. 1,000 times 1.3 to
yeah,
the power of 40. Um, so I like, if you have $1,000 today and you're able to grow that 30% a year for 40 years, that's $36 million.
yeah,
I don't know anyone who thinks that's not enough. Right?
to-
And so
totally.
I think that's the other thing. When I talk to millennials, like I've sort of had a similar conversation with a lot of friends of mine, and I used to believe similarly, like, wow, we're screwed. We're the generation that got screwed. It turns out that every generation feels like they're the ones that get screwed. And you talk to the average 18-year-old kid, they look at a $300,000 house and they think, of course I can't afford that. They think about, oh, student loans should get canceled. They think that all of these things that basically went by the time you're 35 or 40, none of those things are problems anymore because you are no longer working a minimum wage job. Like these things are that kind of go away. None of my friends who are above the age of 30 have any complaints, of which all of them had complaints when they were 22, right? And so this is just a thing. It's kind of like, when I was, 22, I would like volunteer for Bernie Sanders, uh, and there's kind of the joke that as you get older, you get more conservative, or as you make more money, you get more conservative, or whatnot. But the truth is, like, generally, uh, people in America, especially, like, if you get a job and you invest in index funds, you will do very, 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 very well. Um, because it turns out that number looks so small. It looks like, oh, $1,000, that's nothing. I'm screwed. What they're not doing is like not doing the math on like, well, 10 years from now, that money will have been, compounding, and you will, kind of get better and better jobs over time.
Yeah.
For example, you go to the anti-work subreddit on Reddit, which I'm a huge fan of. I own antiwork.com. Like, I'm a big fan of the movement. I totally believe in the future of work being anti-work. But the average age in that thing is probably 21, 22 years old, right? They also probably live in a city. Houses in America are insanely affordable, insanely affordable. I think people forget because they live in New York and San Francisco and LA and Seattle, and they think that houses are really expensive. They're not. The average house in America is around $240,000, $230,000. The average mortgage interest rate is around 2.5% right now. You can get 20% down or even less if you want to. So
And you're
effectively, like,
talking about when you leave major cities and you start looking in
which
other
is
places in the country.
exactly, and I think the idea that people are entitled to live in one of these cities is insane. I think that was kind of a temporary thing in society, but I don't think that's sustainable. I think you move to a city. I tweeted about this like a couple years ago. San Francisco is like a college. You move to a college, you do it for 4 years, you build up a network, you learn a bunch of stuff, and then you bounce. Um, and that's what has happened. I think COVID kind of accelerated that. I tweeted that pre-COVID, but I think the sort of answer to wealth, happiness, and is kind of all the same, which is like if you take a long-term view, you'll realize like you're actually in a phenomenal position. And when you realize you're in a phenomenal position, you'll start making better decisions. Because if you think you're not in a phenomenal position, you're going to start to make really bad decisions because you're like, oh crap, if I don't make a bunch of money, by, in 6 months, I'm screwed. And that's actually how you make terrible decisions that mean you don't get there, right? But
Yeah.
if you can say, hey, I need to have $1 million in my bank account in 20 years, you can come up with a very, very reasonable, very, very boring plan in
Yeah.
order to do that, right? Yeah.
Totally. So well, I think maybe one of the trends you kind of hit on in your location argument just there or statement is that now we can move geographically in ways that maybe we couldn't before because the nature of work has shifted, the digital economy looks different than it used to. It just kind of similarly how I asked you about your thesis on crypto, talking about NFTs specifically here. Do you see them as really revolutionary in terms of being able to transfer and store like value digitally and not just a form of currency, but in the form of access or information or community? Like, are you seeing that trend as also being important to this geography ability that we're able to shift around? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I think about it is that NFTs are about scarcity. I mean, if they're not scarce, then there's no real reason to use NFTs, in my opinion. And so it's really about scarcity. And so when I think about what should be scarce, right? Because I think part of technology is abundant, right? Is to kind of make it unlimited, right? Like for example, like every single person on planet Earth can like watch a movie, right? Playing a new movie, like watching, I don't know, whatever, like Titanic, right? And I think everyone should be able to watch that movie effectively for free, and they can do that because of BitTorrent and piracy, or they can purchase it on whatever thing they want, and pay for sort of that convenience. But I personally believe information should not be scarce. Information should be free, and so I believe, for example, that music should be free. It should not be scarce. Everyone should be able to consume it. And by the way, this is what has happened. Has already happened and played out in the music industry. Music used to cost money, and now effectively all music is free. If you're paying for music, you're choosing to pay for music. And the way the artists make money is via scarcity, which is concert performances, merchandise, and attention, right? Like meet and greets and things like that, right? All of these are kind of scarce sort of things that they're able to do. And I don't see that going away. And so I think when I look at NFTs and things like that, I sort of think of like, well, these sort of the things that are scarce will remain scarce. They've been scarce before the internet existed, and they will be scarce like 1,000 years in the future. Things like time and attention. And if that's the case, then NFTs I think will be really great fit for all those sorts of things, right? So for example, like a plot of land is very scarce, right? And so I think a plot of land will 100% move into the crypto land. Like that makes total sense to me. That I own a house in Portland. I have some a title, but the title even it's not even technically like no one knows who owns the land. Like the America's a very weird place. We just kind of went and conquered land and took stuff and and like it's a very kind of complicated thing. So when you buy a house, you're hoping that you're buying it from the person who actually owns the land, but you don't actually know, and which is why title insurance exists. You need to get insurance because there may be a case in which someone shows up and says, "Hey, actually, here's some proof that I bought this land from this person in 1842, and therefore you didn't know it. It was never on the sort of state register, and that's why you have to kind of get title insurance." And so I think all of that stuff, when you can have the sort of idea of provenance, I think makes a ton of sense, and I think all of that stuff will kind of move on chain, quote unquote, sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
There's still problems with that. For example, securities laws, right? So it's not you don't get a lot of the value that you'd be able to get from DeFi if you do that, but I think you'll see a lot of that. And then I think ownership is still pretty interesting. So while I don't think music NFTs will work in the sense that people will buy an NFT and that NFT will allow them to consume the music. I think NFTs will be used by musicians in order to build community, to have scarcity, to do these kind of meet and greet concert, things. And there may be some sort of convenience value to it, right? Where if you have the NFT, then you can like consume it in their, custom app or, wallet player, etc. I do see that, but I think of it kind of like Spotify, which I think it's like people forget that you can pirate, anytime you pay for any digital thing, you're choosing to pay for that. Because this is all available for free on the internet, right? Especially if it's non-interactive. If it's interactive like a video game, you might have to pay. Like we haven't figured out a way to do that, but that's going to change too, right? And like soon everyone will be able to play any video game ever created for free. And this is just the nature of everything, right? We used to think that like building software was valuable and IP and patents were valuable, and now we know that like they're basically useless. Like no one is really, no startup is valued based on their kind of software portfolio. I think that's actually a really great thing, because I think inherently like these sort of trademark IP things are inherently unfair. it's kind of who showed up first gets access, right? It's like who showed up first gets to own the land, right, by planting a flag in it.
Yeah.
So
I
that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I like what you said about bringing the music NFT full circle, talking about scarcity. And I agree that I don't think that music NFTs really answer a need in terms of consuming music, but talking about ways that NFTs can allow creators to create deeper connections and engagement opportunities with their fans. So, you're deep in the creator economy, building Gumroad to allow creators to sell their products to fans or audiences in a easier way. And I'm definitely not as deep in terms of the full Gumroad platform as you are and what you're seeing. So I'd like your perspective here. Like that enables the seller to profit off their digital product, right? Is there that need though to go a level deeper and create those engagement opportunities with people? And maybe it's from do you see that being valuable from a future business pipeline? Like once you have those connections established, then there's an opportunity to sell product B and C? Or do you think people want to get closer to the people that they're buying products from? Because I see that as a really interesting way for NFTs to change how we do things right now. Just you're not reliant on a platform to give you features and access to how you can message the person who bought it or retarget them through an email campaign. Now you have their Ethereum address and you can create experiences around that. You can airdrop them new digital goods. So you just create a lot of new avenues for connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think we give everyone on Gumroad like the email address of every purchaser, which is effectively that, right? Like it's actually even better than that because you can't push notify someone's Ethereum wallet address, but
Yeah.
you can send somebody an email. So I'd argue that like what we do is actually in Web 2 is actually far better than Web 3 in that way. The Web 3 benefit that we cannot do in Web 2 is that you can like more easily sort of connect and services together, right? And so you could say, for example, like, hey, if you're in this group, you can also you can join this pre-mint or something like that, right? So I think the composability of crypto is what's interesting to me because I frankly think Web 2, every individual Web 2 property is far better than the Web 3 equivalent. Like it's not even a competition. That's not how Web 3 wins. Web 3 wins because it's a hive mind, right? Like it's kind of like the human playing with fighting 1,000 ducks or whatever. Right? Like, do you want to fight one horse-sized duck? The Web 2 is like a horse-sized duck, and Web 3 is like 1,000 duck-sized horses, right?
I
And
don't want part in either one of those fights.
I know, yeah. But that's kind of how I think about it is like web, and this is why I think a lot of people like struggle to see the value in Web3 because like they just look at it and they're like, I don't get it. You're just like waving a bunch of hands and there's a lot of money going on. And I use Spotify, but I don't use any of this stuff. And no musician I really know uses any of it either. Well, the reason is because it's going to just take a lot more time to figure out because it has to happen in this very bottoms up way. For example, Gumroad, we support credit card payments. I would love, and we actually did work with Twitter originally. It's like 2013 or 2014 to do buy on Twitter. So there was a credit card in Twitter. You could hit buy, check out on Twitter, and that was powered by Gumroad actually, and it was really cool. Got a nice New York Times article about it, and totally failed. Totally failed. Why? Because the user experience was terrible. Because we had to convince do all of this stuff specifically with Twitter. And if we wanted to do the same thing with Facebook, we would have had to do the exact same stuff with Facebook, and they would have had a different standard, and they wouldn't have been compatible. And so effectively, the UX just sucked, and it will never be good because every single company wants to own the credit card information. To your point, you want to own that data. And so the answer actually is none of us get to own the data. Gumroad shouldn't own the data. Facebook shouldn't own the data. Twitter shouldn't own the data. We should all publish to a blockchain. And that's how we should build. Ironically, Facebook figured this out and spent a lot of time and money doing this with Libra, this and Diem, etc. Like this was their entire strategy, and this is kind of why I think the regulatory component is so important here. Is because if it happened, it would have been an amazing thing. It would have been an amazing thing if Facebook, Twitter, PayPal, et cetera, got together and said, "Hey, we have this standard. This is what PayPal's been wanting to do for since 1999." Like I think everyone knows what the future looks like. I think the building it and getting it to scale and getting the governments in on it, that is what's really, really, really
Yeah.
challenging. Right. And so that's where I see the opportunity is to kind of the composability and this the sort of lack of a winner take all mindset. I think is what's really important and missing in Web 2. But in terms of UX, I think Web 2 is far better.
Totally. And I do think that all of Web3 users would agree with that statement
Totally. Yeah.
around
I don't think
UX.
I'm preaching to the choir here for sure.
Yeah. And, I guess what I'm excited about is now that it seems like the energy is here, the realization that the composability is an important aspect to add to these products and applications we're building. And now over the next couple of years, let the UX catch up to meet where the current technology stack lies, then we'll start seeing some beautiful innovations. So I'd like to talk about a little bit about what you've been experimenting with in Web3 with the project, and you tell me, is it a project, is it a community? Fweb3, like what's your goal with this project, and like what inspired you to start building in public with it?
Totally. Yeah. So, I've been, as you kind of talked about, like follow the Web3 stuff relatively closely in the last couple of years. And I invest in it. I have a lot of friends in it, etc. And I always find that, and frankly, I was getting a little bit of FOMO, especially as an investor, because even though, this stuff is going to take a long time, you kind of need to get in on the ground floor, right, generally, and wait a long period of time. And so I felt like I was kind of just thinking about, okay, like I'm a pretty decent sort of Web 2 investor. Why? Probably because I build stuff and because people in Web 2 might know me or what I've built because I've been doing it for a while. I have some sort of credibility, I have some experience, so people might want me on the cap table. All of these things don't apply to Web3. I'm kind of, there are some things that do apply, but I think generally, people want Web3 founders on their cap table. People want people who've been investing early in Web3 projects on their cap table, et cetera. And so I felt like, okay, how do I do this? Well, there's unfortunately no shortcut. Like I have to do what I did in Web 2, which is build stuff, for fun. Mostly with the goal of just learning and experimenting and trying out new stuff and being forced to figure it out. I had never deployed a smart contract, for example, right? I assume most venture capitalists have never deployed a smart contract. However, like to me, that's kind of insane, right? That's kind of like saying I'm going to invest in startups that I've never like shipped an app or built a website before.
Yeah.
Again, people do that, but I think it's sort of ill-advised. You would be a lot stronger if you kind of knew what you were doing. And so I was just like, okay, well, I'm busy, right? Like that's great, but like everyone wants to. It's not like, you have to make the time. And honestly, what I noticed was February and, Feb and Web have EB in common. And so basically I was like, wait a second, like, February, Web3. And so I just came up with this name and I felt, okay. And, sometimes you just need a stupid reason, right? Like, the good reasons didn't work on me. So now I needed a stupid one to motivate me. And I just was like, okay, what I can do is I can spin up, like, basically I can just tweet out and sort of tell my audience, like, hey, I'm going to spend February building in Web3. We're going to call it Web3. We're going to build some sort of game together as a sort of a forcing function to learn. And we have effectively 28 days to do it, right? The shortest month of the year. And that's what we did. We kind of built this game. I had really no clue like what it was going to do. I just kind of would tell people I'm building a game, and we just kind of riff back and forth. And over time, like, I saw what Wordle was up to, and I was like, oh, maybe we can build something like that, like a very simple game that feels hard, but is actually pretty easy, which means it's kind of a very satisfying experience. It's kind of pretty social. It's pretty lightweight. And so that's kind of the approach that we ended up taking. And so over the course, yeah, honestly, like very surprised at what we did. Like
Yeah.
I had never ever done really anything in Web3, and within 28 days we basically spun up a new token on Ethereum. We moved 10% or now 20% of that token to Polygon. We set up a faucet so that people can get that token for free, and then we set up a Matic faucet so people can turn that Fweb3 token into Matic, so they can effectively have gas to do all of this stuff on chain with. So it's effectively a totally 100% free game. And then people can complete 9 dots. That's kind of like the current version of the game where they connect their wallet, they get some tokens,
Yeah.
they send those tokens to somebody else, they burn some, they swap some for any token they want on Uniswap. And the last challenge of, oh, they mint an NFT, things like that. And then the last challenge of the game is they deploy their own smart contract to the blockchain. So every single person to win the game, sort of the final boss, is to deploy a smart contract. Um, and that, yeah, and then when you complete all those steps, you can get verified by a judge, and then get 1,000 commemorative tokens, and then also a trophy NFT. So there's 333 gold trophies. I believe they're all taken now. There's 3,000 silver ones, and then the rest will be sort of,
Yeah.
whatever the number is, 6667 will be bronze or copper trophies.
I'm working my way through the game right now, and it's really interesting, the the steps that are involved to complete, and then having the final boss being the deploying a smart contract, I think is an awesome move. It's getting more into the weeds from a technical standpoint is something that I've been personally trying on my own too. And sometimes it can be overwhelming just to start from scratch, but to have like, some of those walkthrough steps to guide you through, I think has been nice. And we'll
And
definitely have a link.
yeah, framing it as a game too, right? I think is really key.
Yeah. And we'll have the link to that for anyone listening in the description if you want to check it out yourself. Now I'm curious, why was the focus on education? And now it sounds like you might have just stumbled on into that, or was that, intentional? Because a big talking point right now, everything crypto, is we need education on why it's important, how you use it, from the ground up, we need education. So was that an intentional decision?
Yeah, I mean, I just felt like I feel like I'm a relatively competent person, and I've spent a lot of time like building software, and I still felt like I didn't have a good grasp of a lot of the mental models that you kind of need to make sense of crypto. And so, yeah, it was kind of just selfish, to be honest, right? Of like, what game would I have wanted? Like, ideally, I wouldn't have had to make this game. This game would have already existed. And there are some games like Rabbit Hole has some stuff, and Crypto Zombies, and things like that.
Yeah, I've checked out
It all
both.
felt like almost too playground like for me. It's like, no, I want to scare people. Like, I want to make people feel uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to just set up a sandbox and do stuff, right? Because the problem I find there is that you complete these tutorials, you think and then you come up with some business idea, and then you realize like, oh crap, I have no idea how to actually build this thing, right? And so I think there was kind of two components that were really important. One was that we were actually going to build a real mainnet game that was going to cost some amount of gas to play, and I didn't even know in the beginning like how to solve for that. I just knew that it was important. And actually it was a community member, Brian Schuster, who came in and said, hey, just so you know, like all of these dots are going to take $20 a piece to complete if you keep this on ETH. So like we should figure this out. And I was like, pitch me. I don't know. I literally have no idea. So a day later he came.
The broader like crypto community is so focused on Ethereum, and I think that the messaging gets out like Ethereum blockchain rules all. But once you start really thinking about the scalability and how we get millions of people to interact and use, and you start thinking about the fees, I'm glad that you made that decision, because going to Polygon really does make it accessible for a lot more people.
Totally. I mean, ultimately, and this is something I always try to remind the people who I know who are either in crypto actively or have invested in crypto and sort of think it's the future, but don't really know why people hate on it so much. And the reason people hate on it so much is like really simple, which is it's freaking expensive. Like, guess what people hate on? They hate on expensive things because they can't buy them, they can't participate in them, and they feel excluded. And when those things go up in value, they feel even more hurt because they didn't get to participate in that. They didn't even have the choice. And so it really, to me, just, it doesn't, people talk about climate change and this and that. Literally, I guarantee you none of that matters. That's all a red herring. It all will go away the minute you solve for price and accessibility. If you make it accessible, guess what? No one cares that the internet ruins the planet. No one cares that cars ruin the planet, right? Or maybe some people do, but generally it's not the time of the day. It's mostly the fact that people, feel like excluded from it.
Yeah.
That's just kind of the truth, I think. But yeah, it was, ETH is sort of $20 a transaction or $5 or whatever it ends up being, but it's multiple dollars a transaction. And I think it is really important, whether that be through rollups, whether that be through side chains like Polygon, whether that be through just maybe a different approach, some people say, well, Ethereum is going to do proof of stake and that's it, and that's enough, right? Like there's a lot of sort of different opinions are being thrown around. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think at least, and this is, the nice thing about building something is I can just tell people this is the decision we made, right? So I can speculate all we want. All you can speculate all you want on zero knowledge versus validity stuff versus roll-ups versus optimistic roll-ups versus this and that. I can just tell you, look, like I had to make a quote unquote a business decision and I chose Polygon, right?
Yeah. And I know from
So
talking to our CEO at Unstoppable Domains, Matthew Gould, like he's definitely of the mindset too that we make these decisions now and we continue evaluating because
totally.
things are going to change again and we're going to do whatever is best for the end consumer and that might change even if it means changing infrastructure along the way. So
Yeah, totally. I also think there's a hardware component here that I think many people don't talk about, which is ultimately the solution. A huge part of the solution is Moore's law, right? Which is like 10 years from now, if you think about that compounding, right? Like you do that to your laptop today, like your laptop in 20 years will be a supercomputer, right? Like there might even be a nuclear reactor in it. Who knows? Uh, and if that's the case, then guess what? Like a lot of these problems won't be things because just like for example, like we will not be bounded by energy consumption. That just will not happen. Humans will not peak energy consumption usage. That is a recipe for the world ending. What will happen is we will figure out ways to deal with the amount of energy that we create, and actually like the energy we create 50 years from now will be 1,000x, 10,000x what we do today, right? Like it should be because like I want that life. Like I don't want to reduce my energy
yeah,
consumption, and no human wants to. But yeah, I think all of these things will change, constantly reevaluating. I mean, the beauty of crypto is that you can kind of move things from one place to another without their permission, right? And
yeah,
so it's and I told the community, I was like, look, we have 10 million tokens. I'm going to take a million of them and put them in Polygon. And if Polygon implodes for whatever reason, fine. We have 90% left.
yeah,
We might move 10% onto Starknet, right? We might move 10% onto Solana, right? Like we're kind of totally open to experimenting and it's funny, like there's a kind of the meme like no roadmap, but it's kind of like that at Fweb3, which is like I set the roadmap for kind of like the first 28 days, but now it's kind of up to the community. Like if someone says, hey, I want to fork, hey, like Solana has agreed to give us $1 million in exchange for some tokens if we build like the Solana expansion pack, right? And it basically take the same game, but sort of theme it to Solana and make it work on Solana, right? It's like for me, it's like thumbs up or thumbs down. Like thumbs up, right? Cool.
yeah,
Here's 10% of the supply. Go crazy, right? And that's kind of the other thing I'll point out is that one of the reasons I focus so much on education and on building, both of those things, is because those are the people I want to surround myself with, right? Like I don't want a community of 100,000 people who are just talking about price. I want a community of 100 people who are talking about JavaScript and Python and Ruby and Rust and like the technology, because ultimately like that's why I love crypto, is because it's a new technology, right? And so I want to surround myself with those kinds of people and that kind of attitude. And so I kind of want to, I use the game and sort of the things that we build as a way to do that, right? Like
yeah.
there was someone in the Discord who was upset. He's like, I don't think it's fair that you make everyone deploy a smart contract, you know? And to me, I'm like, that's such a patronizing thing to say. Like, you don't think people are capable of deploying a smart contract? It's not that, it's not that crazy. Um, and we've had hundreds of people do it, and so now we at least have the data. I was a little worried, to be honest. I was like, is this too hard? And it certainly is not easy. It's a game. Again, like the nice thing about a game is that it doesn't have to be easy. If
Sometimes
you're
the
trying to
final
build
boss takes a while to beat.
exactly, yeah, like if you frame it like a startup, and this is why like Fweb3 is a side project. It's not a startup. We're not raising venture capital, and why I believe as a product it will be far better than its competition, quote unquote. Because all of these other startups are focused on growth, and so they will not build hard games. They will make games that anyone can play, anyone can win. They will do partnerships in order to like juice their numbers, which is all fine. But like as a technologist, like rabbit hole is not interesting to me. It's very clearly meant for people to just click around and earn some tokens, and I don't think I've learned anything playing that game. Again, nothing personal. I think it's a
Yeah,
great product. It's just a very different approach to the approach that Web3 is taking.
totally. We got only a couple minutes left, and I really wanted to hit the the types of economic utility, if we can kind of rapid
Yeah.
fire that. So you shared a doc with me that you were kind of iterating on around your thesis around NFTs from an economic and cultural standpoint, and you outlined 4 types of economic utility. I would just like to touch on each of those real quick because it's super interesting. So the first one is form utility, then time, place, and possession. Can you walk me through each of those briefly and talk about how Web3 can improve on each of these?
Totally. Yeah. So the simple sort of framework is that there's sort of 4 kinds of value that we kind of, economists and sort of economics 101, use to kind of frame utility value of a product or a service in the marketplace, right? One is form utility, which is effectively like, let's say you take a cocoa bean, right? Turning that into chocolate, right? You've turned the form and made it more valuable to the consumer, and you can effectively charge more money for it, right? So anytime you are able to change form, I think that's sort of a type of utility. I think in Web3 you see this because you can every chain is different, right? You get the utility is very different. You can take a Fweb3 token and you can turn it into something else, or you can wrap it. And so I think NFT creators can think a lot about like the form utility, right? In that way, time utility is really simple, which is save time, right? Basically, if something takes 10 minutes and you can make it take 5 minutes, like that's 5 minutes that you can effectively has some value to the end consumer, right? So this is like the value of a you see this all the time in comparisons. Like Solana says, we're super fast to finality, right? That is kind of effectively time utility, the way that they framed it. And then there's possession utility, which is like effectively you get to do something that you weren't able to do before. Like you weren't able to buy a nice piece of fine art from an artist that you like. Now you can. That's sort of possession utility, and I think that's also really important. One thing I love about crypto is I believe in the sort of the future being one liquid market, where like everything just gets bought and sold in this one liquid marketplace, which I guess DeFi is that, right? That's kind of another way of talking about it. And then so there's form, time, and place utility, right? This is less relevant, though. I think maybe if you you can say the place utility is like, well, let's say I build an app, but you can only use it if you're on Ethereum, right? And that you have a bunch of users who are not on Ethereum, bringing it into wherever they happen to be, it can be really valuable. And so if you're building, I always think about this like, what value are you providing? And it should be one of those 4. You're either creating, you're either changing form, creating value that way. You're saving people time, creating value that way. You're bringing something closer to a group of people. You're creating value that way. Or you're making it possible to give access to a group of people that may not have had access to it before. And I think the best businesses do all 5 or all 4, excuse me, right? So Amazon, for example, save time and 2-day shipping, money, things are cheaper, form, pretty obvious, and then and possession, right? And they're a massive $2 trillion whatever dollar company, right? And what does Google do? Google is primarily time utility, right? Saves you time. They do less of the other things. And so I'm always kind of just thinking about that, like how do I save people time, make money, save money, and yeah.
Awesome. No, I like the breakdown of those different types of economic utility. Lots more to think on there. So to wrap up, I want to do my 1-2 Web3 with you, 3 rapid fire questions. The third one, just knowing you, I think you might have a little bit more to say on. But the first one is, can you name an influential Web3 creator, entrepreneur, or collector who really has inspired you in the space?
Yeah, I really like, who's that punk
6529?
6529. Yeah, he seems really smart and I like a lot of what he has to say, to say, and what he collects, and I think he explains like art history. I think he really kind of helped me grok like kind of the importance of art history in this whole conversation.
Sweet. And favorite NFT?
Favorite NFT, probably an Xcopy. I think Xcopy is probably my favorite artist in the Web3 space. Probably not too controversial of a thing to say. I don't know which one. I think the most recent Putin one that he did was pretty darn awesome, though.
Yeah. Are you in the Proof Collective?
I am, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, very cool. And then third question, in 5 years, what's the craziest thing you think we'll be doing in the metaverse that we're not really talking or thinking about yet?
I mean, who knows, man? I mean, I think probably I don't know, something sexual, to be honest. I think there's going to be, if you look at a lot of like the sort of the Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, the sort of like for example, the largest creator economy in Web 2 is not Patreon or Gumroad or Substack. It's OnlyFans, right? And so ultimately humans have very few things that they need and want. if you think about utility value, we're animals. And so I think I'm sure that's already happening in Web3, but I think figuring out how to make it mainstream, and I imagine that 5 years from now that will be a huge sort of topic of conversation.
Yeah.
Right? There's no creator economy company that gets referenced in rap songs, for example, right? Besides OnlyFans, right? And so I think you'll see that sort of the merge of those things happen. I think it may take some more time, either because of cultural differences between maybe who's currently working in Web3 or whatever, or just like, again, like the regulatory environment is already tricky enough. Like you may not want to add so many layers to it. But I do think that's sort of an inevitability, and often like when I see new tech, sort of that is a sort of an application of it very early. It's often that and music are often like the two earliest
Yep.
ones in terms of industry.
Great. And if there are any rappers listening out here, I got like one line for you if you want to drop Gumroad in your song. Used to be waiting for DSL to load. Now I'm selling product on Gumroad. So, I mean, take my line.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
And I appreciate everything you share with us today, Sahil. Can you just plug where people can follow you and keep up with what you're building in this space?
Totally. Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is at SHL, 3 letters. And my project du jour currently is Fweb3, which is on Twitter at fweb3.x. Actually, the URL is probably better. So fweb3.xyz is probably the best place to go. That links out to Twitter, Discord, GitHub. All
Awesome.
open source, totally free. Always looking for people to play the game, help build the game, contribute docs, do office hours for the new players, all that good stuff.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today on the crypto, NFT, Web3 space. I know I learned a lot. If you like the episode, please drop a subscribe on YouTube if that's where you're watching. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or your favorite streaming platform, it would mean a lot if you subscribed and followed along. We're dropping episodes weekly. So with that, we'll see you next week. Peace out. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unstoppable Podcast. If something we said today resonated with you, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this with your friends. And remember, this conversation doesn't have to end here. Tweet us your thoughts, ideas, or questions at Unstoppable Web. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.